We began in the first hour in the adult Bible study a little survey of the book of Ecclesiastes. So even though we were reading through a portion of John's gospel, I'd ask you to go back into the Old Testament now and find the book of Ecclesiastes, find Psalms, then find Proverbs right after that, and then right after Proverbs comes the book of Ecclesiastes. And you may say, what does John 3:16-21 really have to do with the book of Ecclesiastes? I think that'll become clear in the course of our study this morning. Because we're going to look at some things here, really surveying the first two chapters of Ecclesiastes. I can't preach verse by verse, although we're going to touch on the important things that come to us in these first two chapters. And I hope that you will see how it really positions us to understand more fully the very kinds of things that the Apostle John recorded for us in John 3. So as we look to the Word here, we surveyed very briefly the life of Solomon and his 40 years as ruler of Israel, noting that he began well and he ended poorly. And what happened between the age of 18 and 58, those 40 years in which he ruled Israel, was that his heart was increasingly divided. Whereas he began as a young man with a heart that was wholly devoted to the Lord, over those 40 years, his heart was turned away by many other things, primarily the foreign wives, and remember he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which is fairly offensive to us in our culture, isn't it? You just can't even think like a Westerner. You have to think like a Middle Easterner, and you know enough about culture that even today there are those who have multiple wives. I'm not saying you have to like it. I'm just simply saying you need to understand it really was a different culture, and it was a different time. But those 700 wives were part of what ultimately divided his heart from its single devotion toward the God who put him on the throne over Israel at that point. Ecclesiastes gives us a big picture view of all the struggles that were going on in Solomon's heart. The wisest king who ever lived, according to the Bible. The wealthiest king who ever lived, according to the Bible. The most influential king of his day, we believe. And historical records would verify that. And yet he had struggles that, frankly, are exactly like your struggles and mine. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? Because most of us think, don't we? Well, if I had the money of Bill Gates and I had the authority of, and pick whatever, authoritative leader you have, and if I were surrounded by all the beautiful things and beautiful people and beautiful privileges of Solomon, life would be really good. Well, we're going to learn some things today, and then next week, if God gives us opportunity to gather again, where you realize that life, if it's lived apart from God, regardless of the resources and experiences and opportunities you have, will always come up short. There will always be an emptiness to it, because your life was created to include more than just the things and people and possessions that you see around you. So we begin here. I want to just read a few verses from Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has been already in the ages before us. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Let's pause there for a moment and just ask for God's help as we study this morning. Heavenly Father, we come in the name of Jesus Christ to seek your help in understanding your timeless truth. And we are grateful to open the Word together this morning, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve this assembly. And I ask, Heavenly Father, that by your Spirit you would give us wisdom to understand these words and give us humility to receive them. And I ask that you would give us strength to go live them. And I pray that you would speak to the particular needs that are represented here, just hundreds if we were to take time to list all the things that are on our hearts. And some cares and anxieties are great, and the stress is overwhelming to some who are here this morning. Use your word to strengthen their faith and to encourage them for Christ's sake. Those who feel the uncertainty of life, I pray that you would give them answers on this day, and that you would grow hope and faith in our hearts as you have located all hope and all joy and all blessing in your Son, Jesus Christ. So above all, we want to be brought to Jesus. We want to see him as this great King of glory. And we pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. As I was doing some study in the book of Ecclesiastes last fall, I came across a blog entry that mirrored the kind of things that are in so many of our hearts. And this is something written by a young lady. I think I really don't know much about her, but just seeing a little bit of personal information that was there. And total stranger to me. It's just one of those things I stumbled across, but I thought most of us relate to this kind of thing. And yet listen to how she is trying to answer some of life's most important questions. This is from an entry that she made a couple of years ago, November 5th, 2011. She says, I think we will never really find the true meaning of life, as it all starts with two questions. And here they are. Who am I, and what am I doing here? Those are two questions that every one of us fully relates to, don't we? Who am I? Why am I here? But listen to how she grapples with this. These can never be truly answered. And that's where I think, really? Wow. Let's see what else she says. We all search for the answer through our lives, but most of us are searching at the wrong places. We try to get closer to the answer, but we are actually running away from it, because in the end, the answer is right here within ourselves. Yes, the answer will never be clear, but we can get close to it by questioning ourselves, trying to look at the world through different perspectives and see the big picture. So we are no longer lost in the details, so we can see what role we play in that picture. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And finally, notice that we are all in this journey together. We are all searching, and that we should savor every bit of it. I read that and I thought, so close, and yet very far. And where it comes up short for me, and probably for most of you, is saying, finding the answer within, in myself, really? I'm often very frustrated precisely by what's in me. And she is wrestling, though, with questions common to every one of us. Here's a piece of advice from another article I found just perusing the internet. How to discover your life purpose in about 20 minutes. That really caught my attention. Is that all it takes? Why did I go to school for all of those years? Saved a lot of time, sweat, and money. How to discover your purpose in life? Well, there are many ways to do this, some of them fairly involved. Here's one of the simplest that anyone can do. The more open you are to this process and the more you expect it to work, the faster it will work for you. But not being open to it, or having doubts about it, or thinking it's an entirely idiotic and meaningless waste of time won't prevent it from working as long as you stick with it. Here's what to do. Take out a blank sheet of paper or open up a word processor where you can type. I prefer the latter because it's faster. Number 2, write at the top, what is my true purpose in life? Number 3, write an answer, any answer that pops into your head. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence. A short phrase is fine. Number 4, repeat step 3 until you write the answer that makes you cry. That's your purpose. There you have it. We could close our meeting right now and just all go find a blank piece of paper. This is well-intentioned, because who doesn't want to know their life's purpose, right? I'm not sure if I wrote for 20 minutes, I'd write to the point of tears or not. And I somehow think that that's probably not how we discover our life's purpose, is it? But these are two examples of how ordinary people like us, wrestle with, what am I doing here? Why am I on planet Earth at this time? And those are the questions that Solomon wrestled with during his life. And don't think that just because he had all that wealth and power and influence and relationships that he somehow moved beyond that point where he was wrestling with, why am I here? Why am I here? One Bible commentator writes of Ecclesiastes, this book captures the futility and frustration of a fallen world. It is honest about the drudgery of work, the injustice of government, the dissatisfaction of foolish pleasure, and the mind-numbing tedium of everyday life. Any of you feel that way? Any of you already dreading getting up tomorrow morning and going back to that same old job to do those same old things for the same old hours for another same old week? Life can be, the tedium of everyday life can be mind-numbing. And then this author goes on to write, think of Ecclesiastes as the only book of the Bible written on a Monday morning. I love that. But don't think of it as a book that really doesn't give any answers. It's full of them. And we hope to get to one of those significant answers today. So here we dive in. I read a portion of chapter 1. Solomon's wrestling with this particular question. If you're trying to take notes and wonder, okay, how is he organizing his thoughts? Well, here's big point number 1. It really is the form of a question. Is there any real meaning in all this wearisome labor? Is there any real meaning in all this wearisome labor? Note with me, if you will, in verse 2, there's an honest observation from Solomon. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. And by the way, the preacher refers to Solomon. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That particular term is going to occur multiple times through the book. And if you read Ecclesiastes, Solomon's work in one sitting and took note of the number of times, you'd see that word vanity occurs 29 times in this 12-chapter book. The word vanity literally has the idea of what is like a breath, a vapor, the kind of thing that happens on a cold morning when you step out the door and you breathe out that warm, moist air coming out of your lungs, and you see it for a moment, and then it vanishes away. And that gives us a picture in thinking about, in understanding what Solomon is writing. It has the idea of what is lacking weight or substance. And this idea of vanity, those of you who have studied the Bible for a while may be thinking of an antonym. A word that stands opposite of that word vanity would be the word glory. We sing of the glory of God. We are singing of the substance of God's character, the substance of his existence or his work. That is, there's great weight to it. And the scriptures tell us that the heavens reveal the glory of God, and the expanse over us shows his handiwork. And so the point, and I'm quoting loosely from Psalm 19, when you read that particular psalm, the point that the psalmist is driving us to is that when you stand outside and you look at this world around us, you're supposed to say, someone of great weight and substance created this. And it's supposed to compel you to search and to know. And when we study the heavens, even our own solar system, and we measure the staggering distances that the sun, 93 million miles away from us, blazing at nearly 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit on its surface, its light traveling to the earth in a mere 8 minutes and 19 seconds. It supports the earth's life through photosynthesis. I mean, when you just begin to think about a few scientific facts that we know, you're supposed to say someone weighty and substantial is behind it. Now, in contrast to that concept of weight and substance or glory is the idea of vanity. Vaporous, appears for a moment and it's gone. And Solomon is saying about his experiences in life, it's all vanity. And that makes us pause and say, really? Are you telling that my existence is nothing, that my work amounts to nothing, that the education I'm devoted to or that my kids are working through is nothing? Well, hold on a minute, because that's not exactly what Solomon is saying, but he is talking about his own experiences. So it's an honest observation that he's making here. And then a serious question in verse 3. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? What's the point for humankind? We work very hard. There's got to be more to it than just having enough money at the end of the week to buy my groceries, to buy my gas, to get some clothing as I need it. Maybe if I'm fortunate to, take a trip of some kind of vacation. What's the point? What does man gain? What profit or advantage by all the toil? And the word toil conveys heavy, wearisome labor. That's what you all feel when you work 60, 70 hours a week. From time to time, we talk about a regular 8 to 5 job. I don't know too many who just work for 40 hours. And even if you're putting in 40 hours at the company, you've still got a mountain of work waiting for you when you get home, don't you? Our weeks are long and they are tiresome. Well, is there any real meaning in all this wearisome labor? That's a significant question that Solomon opens with. Now look at how he begins to answer that in verses 4 through 11, and we read a portion of this. And if I can paraphrase what Solomon is saying, and this would be point number 2, seems to me we're just going in circles. As we read through that, did it strike you that he's talking about the circuits of life? And he gives 4 examples. The first is generations come, generations go, but the earth remains. One generation is here, they live out their days, another generation comes behind them. But the earth remains. I know there are many who are concerned about saving the planet. Many threats to it. Yeah, I'm concerned about that too. But this earth has been here a long time. It's going to be here for a long time to come. 3 years ago, my wife and I had the privilege of celebrating our 20th anniversary up in San Francisco. That's the first time I got to spend significant time here in California, and we loved it. And one of the things that we did was to travel across the Golden Gate Bridge and then head into Muir Woods. And I suspect many of you have been there, maybe not. Since we couldn't get all the way to the famous redwoods, these are, next in line, I guess. And it was spectacular. To walk into that particular setting, it is a monument, and you just have the sense of you're in a sanctuary. You should speak softly and quietly and use hushed tones. And then to just read a little bit and learn a little bit as we walk through the forest of those massive redwood trees, the coast redwoods as opposed to the giant sequoias, learning that most of them are between 500 and 800 years old. The oldest one, they believe, is 1,200 years old. And you start going back, even in our own nation's history, and you run out of U.S. history when that tree is a very mature specimen. You think of what was taking place 1,200 years ago in human history. How many generations have come and gone in those 1,200 years? And yet there are trees, an example that the earth remains still here. It's one of the circuits of life. Then Solomon says the sun rises and sets and goes around again. Happens every 24 hours, doesn't it? Third circuit, the wind blows on its same circuits. You've got your wind currents and patterns out here. We have them on the East Coast. The fourth that he mentions is the water cycles from sky to sea. All of our kids, Seth is our youngest, he just finished 6th grade. We now have no elementary school students left, but we had all of our students coming through elementary school did one of those poster boards like many of your kids have done where they glue the cotton balls on in the rain and then they put glitter or something like that for the rain that falls and it fills up the water table and then they have to do something for the streams and they run to the oceans and then there's evaporation and the clouds come back over and it's the water cycle. And whether our kids are doing posters or not, it's happening, right? It's inevitable. Solomon uses all of those as evidence that, as a demonstration that there are circuits of life, and it feels like that to us sometimes, doesn't it? We're just going in circles. Look at verse 8. All things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. That is, we just can't fully understand these things. We live in a world, verses 9 and 10, where there really is nothing new. Someone says, well, there's a lot of new technology. Sure. But if you think of it, the big picture, mankind has always had tools. We're always trying to improve our lives and our productivity, and so we develop tools and we even develop toys for recreation. So you might be able to go to the store and say, that's a new product on the shelf, and yet it's one of a kind of thing that we have had through the generations. Look at verse 11, because Solomon says, here's the real problem. There's no remembrance of former things. The problem is our memory. We forget from generation to generation some of the most important truths for life. And so we come to this question, is life just going in circles? Has our Creator just put us on a metaphysical merry-go-round? Does he get some kick out of this? And is it designed to just lead us nowhere? No, beloved, there is actually something else that God in his kindness is doing. And in his kindness, he has built into life repetition and routine that cause us to say there has to be something more. That's the effect of this sometimes mind-numbing, soul-wearying routine. And if you haven't woken from sleep, maybe on a Monday morning, taking that deep breath, thinking, here we go again, and then said, is this really all there is to it? You will. And the way you answer that question is very significant for your life. Here's the third big point. So this is what drives us to, is there meaning in my life? Look at verse 12 with me. We haven't read this yet, but now Solomon writes, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. That is a huge task. He's basically saying, I'm on a mission to have world knowledge. He's going to be the ultimate student. And then he writes, it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. That is to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Verse 14, I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Is this a fatalistic view? Hey, life's going to be what it is, so forget thinking about it. Well, maybe he has a different conclusion. Let's look at verse 16. I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Now that's not the stopping point, or I should say that's not the end point. We're going to stop there briefly and look at these things. So don't be depressed and discouraged, because some of you may be saying, I came here for this. Life was already hard, and now you're telling me, even reading me Bible verses that say it's all vanity and vexation. What kind of church is this? Hold on, all right? It's going to get better, but just trust me. I'm going to categorize into 4 groups, and we're going to survey these very quickly, but kind of 4 categories for thinking right now in trying to answer, is there meaning in my life? But we're going to walk with Solomon as he describes the particular experiences that he gave himself to. Because remember, he set out on this mission to know the world he lived in and to know the meaning of life. And so if you look at verses 12 through 18, sorry about that, here's the first category for thinking. Maybe there is meaning in life's experiences. Maybe there's meaning in life's experiences. And note again the depth of Solomon's search, verses 13 and 14. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done. Searching is the concept of deep investigation. That word exploring, or explored as he writes it here, even has the idea of investigating a subject on all sides. This is comprehensive. And so the depth of Solomon's search is he's going to the ends of the earth. How about the breadth of Solomon's experience? Look at verse 16. He says, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And actually, if you went back and looked at history, you'd find out that his father David was not the first king in Jerusalem. There were actually many others predating David and Moses and even Abraham. The history of Jerusalem was long and extensive at that point. And he said, verses 16 to 17, my heart has had great experience. So in depth, in breadth, Solomon's experience was vast. And what is the conclusion? We read it in verse 14, all is vanity and striving after wind. He's going to repeat that in chapter 2, verse 1, and chapter 2, verse 11. He's going to say things like we just read, verse 15, that you can't straighten out what is crooked. Verse 17, I perceived that as I came to know that it's a striving after wind, much wisdom is much vexation. There's this feeling of anxiety that comes over him as he sees more and knows more. There's a kind of sadness even in this distress that he is experiencing. And then he uses the word sorrow to describe it. This experience actually increased his sorrow. It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But he's not done. Is there meaning in life's experience? Not in the way that Solomon was finding it. Here's a second question, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Maybe there is meaning in life's pleasure. So look at what he says. Experience wasn't giving it. So now, chapter 2, verse 1, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom. So that is, he didn't get himself to just some kind of drunken stupor, but he was nonetheless taking something very common even in our day and age. Many people use it for some kind of pleasure or joy, and he's saying, maybe I'm going to find meaning for life in a pleasure like this. How to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man. And yet, he's not finding it there. Enjoy your life, find laughter, experience pleasure. What's the meaning? And you know, if I can insert this, these were not short-lived experiences of pleasure that Solomon had. We looked at some of them in the first hour. No one ever feasted like this man. Listen to what the book of the Kings records of Solomon's court. In First Kings chapter 4, verse 22, Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour, and I know these measurements are not normal to us, 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. Now, obviously, he didn't eat all of that. That's not the point. He would have been dead after one day. But those quantities, some have estimated, were 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of meat. He's not only feeding his household, he's feeding his court, he's feeding vast numbers in Jerusalem. It was a grand time to be an Israelite. And furthermore, you read in that chapter that nothing was lacking. Whatever they wanted, they had. And yet, his conclusion of these experiences of pleasure, as we just read, laughter that comes out of that is actually madness. Pleasure of that kind, what use is it? Is there meaning in and of itself? Does your life find meaning in pleasure? Solomon's answer is no. Third category, maybe there's meaning in life's enterprises. Experience? Not in and of itself. Pleasure? Not in and of itself. What about enterprises? If you read the account, which we won't take time to read all of these verses, but in Ecclesiastes 2, verses 4 through 8, he describes extravagant building projects. He established business and trade, international trade. It is staggering to read of the kinds of things that he did by way of international business and how his kingdom grew rich through these things. He accumulated resources unlike many others, most others in life have ever done. Then you even read in verse 8 that he established kind of his own arts and entertainment center. He brought in singers and those who were servants in that context. It was a staggering amount of enterprise that he engaged in. And yet his conclusion is, it's empty. The fourth category for you to think about very briefly, verses 9 and 10, is life's accomplishments. Look at what he says in verse 9. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Seriously? From the outside looking in, I'm reading of the glory and grandeur of Solomon's reign thinking, I'd trade places. I love meat. That in and of itself is compelling. Wow. Knowledge? Boy, I'd love to have a mind that was full of the knowledge that he possessed of his world. But Solomon is telling us honestly, I've got all of this. It's empty. Why is it empty? Why is he not satisfied? Well, that's where he starts driving to this particular point in verses 12 to the end of that second chapter. So what is the point, Solomon? What is the point? If the experiences that you've had, if the pleasures that you've enjoyed, if the enterprises that you've engaged in, and the accomplishments you have known, that you are now known for, do not have the power to satisfy you, what is the point? And before he answers that, he tells us there is some advantage in wisdom, verses 12 and 13. But then look at what follows, Ecclesiastes 2:14. Because any advantage gained by wisdom is tempered by this fact, and we all have to deal with this. The wise person has his eyes in his head, that is, he sees life around him. But the fool walks in darkness, and yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Any ideas what event he's talking about? What happens to everybody who lives long enough? You die. You die. And death is no respecter of persons, is it? You may be able to hold it off for a while, but sooner or later, you're going to come face to face with it. It doesn't matter if you are wise and wealthy or foolish and impoverished. The same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten, how the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life. Yeah, I guess you would. And you know what? If you're sitting at that point this morning too, life becomes very distasteful, especially if you are toward the end of your days thinking, I've done a lot of great things, and yet the reality is within 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I will be forgotten. And people are going to pay more attention to redwood trees a couple hundred miles up the coast than my memory. One generation comes, one goes, the earth remains. Yeah, Solomon, I'm starting to get it. I even feel some of this in my own soul when I read through your testimony and think about my life in relationship to where I am and what I'm doing. And so with strong words, I hated my work. I hated my life. He even says in verses 19 and 20, I gave my heart up to despair. Solomon is expressing the frustration and despair that every generation deals with. For the sake of time, I have to skip over some things that he lays down. One of the interesting things, though, that he is wrestling with, every generation feels like the people, the young people who are following them are just worse than they were, right? Oh, kids these days. One man summarized it like this: the children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their households. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents and tyrannize their teachers. Socrates, who lived between 469 and 399 BC. Kids these days are the same as kids in those days. What do we make of all this? Well, let me get down to the summary, because you've been holding on very patiently, and some of you are saying, I'm not totally discouraged yet, but I'm getting there. Give me some hope. Look at verse 24. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. Now look at this. This is key. Verse 25. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? There's the key. There's the key, my friends. Apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? One of the first truths we need to grapple with, and Solomon uses a little interesting metaphor at the end of his book talking about God's truth being like goads and nails. Do you know what a goad is? It's like a cattle prod. And that's just designed as it can be just a stick with a pointy end, or there are fancier ones where they actually mold some kind of metal point and put it on the end. But common, certainly in the old days, you get cattle moving by poking them, prodding them, goading them. And Solomon will say at the end of chapter 12, the words of the wise are like goads. The words of the wise are designed by God to get you moving in the right direction, not to hurt you, just to motivate you to move along. Well, and these words of Solomon are like goads for us to say, yes, we relate to this. Many of us are saying, I agree. It's full of toil and vexation and kind of thrown up my hands at this point. But now he comes to a point of truth that is like a nail for life. Nails, as Solomon also refers to the wisdom of God, like goads and like nails, these are things that are used to fasten important pieces of structure together. Any of you in construction? Or have done it? Okay, a few of you. All right. Any of you ever tried to build something where you use nails? That would probably be many of the rest of us. Okay, so we get it. Those are the essential pieces, small in comparison to the whole, but if they're not positioned properly and driven skillfully, the whole structure is in jeopardy, isn't it? The integrity of the building is at risk. And Solomon is saying that God's truth serves a purpose much like a nail. It's going to help you assemble the structure of your life in the way that the Creator intended it. So the first goad is this: there's no good in man. There is nothing inherently good in man, verse 24. And nothing better than that he should eat or drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also, now this is like a nail for us, is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Do you know the mistake, the single greatest mistake that Solomon made in his life was trying to live out all of these grand experiences and experiments and the building programs and the enterprise, all that, trying to do it outside of a relationship with God. That's why life became so empty for him. And he reached a point where he said, I've been able to see it all, do it all, learn it all, experience all. It's vanity. But God in his kindness brought him back to this place where he said, in right relationship with God, there is pleasure in your food and your drink and your work. You know, the real question for us this morning, friends, is what kind of relationship with God as our Creator do we really have? And I dare say that some of you could stand and say, yeah, there's a certain emptiness. And I have had good opportunities and great experiences, but I keep saying, is this all there is? And maybe the missing ingredient is not another experience, but relationship to God. So I ask this question: where are you in relationship to your Creator? The experiences, pleasures, enterprises, and accomplishes of life are not intended to bring you the kind of satisfaction that relationship with God himself gives his creatures. Life's good things come from him, but they are not intended to replace him. And life's good things can only be enjoyed as we are rightly related to God. I don't have this in my notes, but as I'm saying this, I'm thinking it's much like my marriage. Marriage is a great thing. But marriage is only a good thing as my wife Kristen and I really have a right relationship. And if you start pulling that relationship apart and pulling the essential pieces of relationship apart, the institution of marriage can actually become a great sorrow, can't it? Solomon says in verse 25, apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? And you know what the answer is? Nobody. If Solomon couldn't experience it, then neither can you or I. Because he could buy anything he wanted, he could build anything he wanted, he could be with anybody he wanted, and yet apart from God, it's empty. Several years ago, we watched the absolute collapse of one of the world's great celebrities, Tiger Woods. From our vantage point, we looked at him and thought, it's the dream. He makes millions of dollars playing a game. And not only does he make millions of dollars playing a game, people come to him and say, hey, we'd like to put your face in our ad or use your voice or use your golf swing because we want to sell more, whatever it is, and we'll pay you more money. He was at that time married to, I mean, this is just so stereotypical, a Swedish supermodel. I mean, we make jokes about that kind of thing, don't we? Yet he's got it. Multiple houses, multiple vehicles, private jets, whatever the man wanted was his. And yet it wasn't enough, was it? And when he crashed his vehicle, speeding out of his own driveway that morning, we got a glimpse into what really was going on. And here was a guy who was obviously not happy in marriage, that marriage, and not fully satisfied. He's out there looking for something else. And all of us just were kind of horrified as we read little bits and pieces of that story and said, really? He had all of that and yet it wasn't enough? Exactly. That's the point. And what Solomon is bringing us face to face with today is one of the essential truths. He doesn't name it in this chapter and actually doesn't explicitly state it anywhere in his book, but what is interesting to me is that Ecclesiastes, if you do a serious study on it, it presses you to that point where you say the only meaningful place to be in life is in right relationship with God. So then the question is, how then do I find that right relationship with God? And that's where if we keep reading through the scriptures, we come to passages just like Pastor Eric read at that particular point in the service in John 3. And I just want to read 2 verses from that particular portion again. Because God himself knows I created human beings for something more than what they are experiencing. And you know, my friends, that for all of this to be corrected so that we all don't end up going into the vanity of Solomon or even making a wreck of our lives as not only Tiger Woods but many others have done, God himself entered the world. And that's the power and, frankly, the astonishing truth of what we call the gospel, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And listen to how John finishes this little summary of that story, that whoever believes in him should not perish. That's a parallel concept to that emptiness and vanity of life that just leads you into absolute destruction. Should not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him, rescued from the emptiness, rescued from the vexation, rescued even from the destruction of our own corrupt, evil, sinful habits, rescued ultimately from the spiritual condemnation that God does bring upon those who reject him. So Ecclesiastes is not a contradiction to the gospel. It actually is a call for it. And that's where I would just desire, and my prayer has been that God himself would impress that upon your heart. Because you know what? Some of you are living for the stuff of life and not the God who blesses us with the stuff. And the stuff is from him. It's his gift. Some of you are living for the relationships of life, but you're not living for the God who gave you life and the capacity to enjoy the relationships. And until you get those things in the right order, all of this, experience, relationships, enterprise, all those things that we've even surveyed this morning are going to keep driving you into a cul-de-sac, if you will, a cul-de-sac of emptiness and frustration, of vexation and vanity. How kind God is, though, to come seek for us when we're at those points. Some of you are in a cul-de-sac today. I mean, you frankly threw up your hands, maybe even recently, and said, I do not know what the point is. It's just driving me nuts. And, God in his kindness has just stepped right into your world and given you some perspective and said, the problem is you have no relationship with me. Or for some of you who once had a relationship with him, you've walked away and you've begun to think that other things are going to make your life fuller and richer than just that sweet and simple relationship you once knew with God. He's calling you back to it. Would you bow your heads with me, please? And we're going to pray for just a moment. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to how God has spoken to you. And some of you have even felt his presence and just even sense that he's speaking to you right now and he's calling you into a closer relationship with him. So will you respond to that and say, Lord, I'm listening. And I want to be in right relationship with you. Some of you may be here saying, I've never seen this before, and I'm not exactly sure what to do next. I know that the pastoral staff here and others in this church would be very happy to talk with you. I'd be happy to talk with you after the service today to try to answer questions that remain. But I want to impress upon you, do the thing that you believe the Spirit of God is asking you to do right now.